The pressure to show up with grace is absolutely untenable. I think that we instead should be encouraged to show up with all of our vulnerability and truth, because that will model for other people that they can do it too. And that complexity is okay. And that feeling like shit one day and feeling great the next is part of the process, if we ever feel great the next day.
Hi, I'm Amory Kibler, and this is The Space Between. I'm a cancer survivor and a mom. And while those roles don't define me, they have shaped who I am. I created this space to share honest stories, expert insights, and meaningful support for families navigating life with cancer. If you're balancing treatment, caregiving, parenting, or just trying to hold it all together, you are not alone. This is your space to connect, to heal, and to feel seen, and I'm so glad that you're here. Today on The Space Between, I'm interviewing Dr. Jessica Zucker. She's an LA-based psychologist specializing in reproductive health and the author of the award-winning books Normalize It, Upending the Silent Stigma and Shame That Shape Women's Lives, and I Had a Miscarriage, a Memoir, a Movement. Jessica is the creator of the viral I Had a Miscarriage campaign. Her writing has appeared in the New York Times, the Washington Post, New York Magazine, Vogue, and Harvard Business Review, among others. She's also a breast cancer thriver. She's been featured on NPR, CNN, The Today Show, and Good Morning America, and earned advanced degrees from New York University and Harvard University. Let's get into it. Hi, Dr. Zucker. Welcome to The Space Between. I'm so excited to have you here today.
Thank you so much for having me.
I always like to start by grounding us in your own personal experience. Can you share with the audience what your cancer experience was like, what kind of cancer you had, and how old your kids were?
Of course. Ooh, I think I need some coffee for this. I was diagnosed with breast cancer in March of 2021, which was about 2 to 3 weeks after my first book actually came into the world. So the timing was incredibly confounding and befuddling, and not that it wouldn't have been otherwise, but it was just like, wow, I was like the highest I've ever been with the excitement of putting this memoir meets manifesto into the world. And then I was diagnosed and was faced with something truly unimaginable, as you well know. You know, the process was interesting, as it probably always is, you know, multiple scans, the several opinions, and shuttling between various hospitals and really trying to get a sense of what lay ahead. So mine is estrogen and progesterone positive and HER2 negative. And essentially, we figured out that I do have a gene. It's called the CHEK2 gene, and it's actually on my dad's side of the family, but I'm the first person in my family to have breast cancer. Because of that, I ended up deciding to have a bilateral mastectomy. I was given the option of just doing the one side where the cancer was found, but we decided that it was most prudent to go ahead and do a bilateral mastectomy just so that I wouldn't be essentially afraid for the remainder of my days and having to do screening ongoing. I had the bilateral mastectomy and then got the results back. The cancer was not in my lymph nodes, so I did not need to go ahead with chemo, which I felt very relieved by. But what they do, and they highly recommend, is 5 weeks of daily radiation. So I did that the summer following, waited a bit, and then went through reconstructive surgery, which in some ways was probably the hardest part of the experience, because I ended up doing what's called a deep flap. And so they take your own tissue to create the breasts, or what they call the flaps. Rather than do implants, I opted for this. And so that was a 12-hour surgery with 12 weeks of recovery. All of this to say that, at the time my kids were 7 and 12, and it was a lot. It was a very sort of poignant time. How do I know what's going to happen next? My husband was sort of always focused, of course, on what the doctors would say and, the staging and the fact that I was doing all the things they were recommending, and therefore, oh, this means you're safe. You will be okay. But I think anybody who has been in the position of receiving a cancer diagnosis can't help but sort of flirt with the idea of, does this mean that I won't be here as long as I had expected? And when you have young children, it's all the more sort of, well, for me, it was all the more complex and compelling. Will I leave my children motherless? And how do we explain this to the kids? And how do I navigate this with enough, for lack of a better word, poise, to sort of illustrate for them that we can go through hard things, that we can be both vulnerable and emotional and afraid, but also remain connected to them in a very important way and continue to sort of somehow mother them through the complication of it all.
And how did you share the news with your kids, and how much did you decide to share with them? Because you didn't lose your hair, right?
Yes, that's true.
Yes.
I did not. It was very challenging to figure out exactly what to say, right? Because it's like children often associate cancer with death if they've heard about it within the family, or if they've heard that a grandparent has died of cancer. And so with my older child, with my son, I ordered a book about cancer that was sort of geared toward children. And we read parts of it together and we talked about it. Luckily, he is he's very into the facts and just wanted to stick with, kind of like my husband, okay, so if the doctor's saying you're going to be okay, you're going to be okay. Great. With my daughter, it was different because she was too young for me to present it in a similar fashion. And again, I was very aware of not wanting to overwhelm her. I also didn't want her to then somehow become afraid of her own body. And of course, at the time, she didn't have breasts, but, just anything. I didn't want to instill fear for her present or her future. And so we basically talked about it like mommy has not a boo-boo, because she was old enough that we didn't talk like that, but like we've, found that mommy has something that could be wrong, and we're going to deal with it and address it and get through this, and then everything will be okay. I'm not sure that I would sum it up as everything will be okay, because I don't know that it is, and I don't know that it will. And of course, I didn't want to promise something I couldn't necessarily deliver on. But basically, though, we were trying to get across the message that we're going to handle this, and we're going to be able to kind of return to some homeostasis afterward.
And how did things progress as your kids got a little bit older and you were going through these reconstructive surgeries? I would imagine that would pique your daughter's interest in some way, and you would have to talk to her about what was happening.
Yeah, I've actually written a bit about that since going through it. Yeah, it's interesting because kids can be they are embodied in vulnerability, like they have yet to kind of become, well, now my kids have, but at the time, there wasn't this sort of self-consciousness. My daughter was at such a tender age and was so direct with me. And so she came into the bathroom after my mastectomy, after a shower, and said something like, I don't know how she said it, but your breasts or your boobies don't look like what I thought they would look like. They just have one cut. And she asked, when will you be getting nipples again? And it was honestly so beautiful because she wasn't walking on eggshells like most adults would do, right? Like she wasn't trying to say it in a way that would make me feel better. She was just asking exactly what was on her mind. And we were able to really talk about it. And it's fascinating. The other day, actually, we were out and she was eating something and she brought up a time during my radiation when I had this thing called esophagitis where I suddenly couldn't really swallow. And she just, she's about to be 12 and she, out of nowhere, recalled this experience. She's like, do you remember when you couldn't swallow and all you ate were popsicles for a week? And I was like, wait, how is this coming up now? And as a psychologist, I found it kind of sad, but also very powerful that she does remember those moments. And I'm careful not to say, do you remember this because you were afraid? Because I don't want to project, I don't want to put on her what I may have felt or what I was feeling myself or what I am maybe afraid that she was feeling. So I just let her talk about it and just kind of try to meet her where she is without making the experience even more harrowing than it was for me, putting it onto her, if that makes sense.
It does. And I definitely found that kids, when they're younger, they don't have the same attachments to things because they don't have any experience, like even the word cancer.
Right.
Because my youngest, she had just turned 5 a couple of weeks before. She had no association with that word. So it didn't bring up fear in her. Whereas even just saying the word cancer when I was diagnosed, it brought up so much terror for me. And I found that it was really hard for me to kind of try to detach myself from all these things and just be a little bit more factual in what was happening and then wait to see what they had questions about. And I found a lot of times that, especially in my youngest, she'd be like, oh, okay. And do you have any questions? No. All right. Can I go play now?
Exactly.
Like, okay. All right.
I want to get back to the fun. Right.
Right. And they're like, oh, another serious conversation.
Yeah, exactly.
Yes.
I mean, it's so beautiful. I mean, I sort of envy and kind of, I wish that I had memories from that time when I was that age, right? Because it feels so much easier. It's not layered the way it is for us. And like you said, the associations that we have with the word cancer is primarily death when it comes to at least older people.
Yes. It's death. It's losing your confidence, your virility. It's all those things. And there's also I think, especially for women, there's also this sense of shame around being sick. And I found so much correlation in your work and the writing that you were doing around miscarriages as well. I was like, wow, there is so much here that I think applies to both, especially in your book, Normalize It. You were talking about breaking taboos around experiences. And I just felt like shame shows up in so many places. It's not just miscarriages. It's so much to do with being a woman.
Yes.
And so much in illness. Why do you think shame clings to experiences like illness or mental health?
I think that we are sort of groomed from the beginning to feel self-conscious or to feel somehow uncomfortable in the skin that we're in. Right? So even when it starts with, menstruation, it's somehow associated with being dirty, that we should hide it, that we should feel like it's disgusting, that we should think that it's something to be quiet about. And so I think this sets off a trajectory over the course of women's lives to feel very sort of ill at ease with ourselves and continually searching for a more perfect version of ourselves, when usually that is not something that's necessarily attainable. It's interesting that you bring up shame with sickness. So when people would actually say to me, what does it feel like to be sick? Or are you scared that you're sick? I never actually thought of myself as sick because I didn't feel sick, right? So it's like, I don't know about you, but like cancer, there was a lump and there was something that needed to be removed from my body, but it's not like I felt like I had the flu, or it's not like I felt like I couldn't leave my bed. So I think I found that incredibly confusing. And I feel like upon being diagnosed, I had zero shame. I had all the fear in the world, but I did not have shame. And the shame seemed to come through things people said to me. So, words like, you're such a warrior, you're going to beat this, you're such a badass, you've done such hard things, this is just another one that you'll conquer. That language, this sort of warlike language, actually made me not feel straight up shame, but just made me feel like I was given a task that seemed incredibly unfair. I did not want to go to war with my body. I wanted to embrace my body and lean into what was happening, not because I was going to, quote unquote, give up. I was going to try my hardest to get through it, of course, but I feel like our souls, our bodies, our psyches need tenderness during times that are so intense like this. The last thing I could think of was like getting up on a horse with a sword and being a warrior. I mean, I just didn't understand. Those things just didn't mesh for me. And so it made me kind of feel like maybe I don't want to be talking about this as openly as I was. And I think that's potentially where shame leaks in or sneaks in, because when people are saying things that don't really match what we're feeling on the inside, I do think we can begin to feel like we want to hide, or that somehow we should feel differently about this situation than we do.
Mm-hmm. I didn't necessarily look like I was sick because the kind of chemo that I had didn't make my hair fall out. And I think because I've always been so thin and it was the middle of COVID, no one noticed that I lost 20 pounds. But I felt terrible and I was so exhausted and I had really bad brain fog. So I felt like I couldn't do anything.
Yes.
And I felt this sort of like shame of that I can't show up and I can't do things.
Yes.
And I also didn't want to tell people that I didn't know very, very well that I had cancer. So there was a lot of like, I can't do that right now. And I think that's what kind of opened the shame door for me, is like, I couldn't really reconcile what I looked like with what I felt with what I should be able to do. And I felt like I was like letting my kids down and what I wanted to be doing. And I was just so damn tired all the time. I couldn't do anything. And I would try to power through and be like, you know what? Okay, I have to do this today. And I would go to get in my car and be like, I can't.
I still feel that way.
It's the first time in my life that I couldn't force myself to do something because I wanted to show up for what someone else wanted. I just couldn't do any of it.
Yes. I mean, once treatment started, when I started radiation, I felt the same way. And to be honest, I still feel that way sometimes. And I don't know how I'm going to feel on any given day, given the medication that I take in order to keep the cancer away. And yes, I understand what you're saying. I feel a sense of, I guess I wouldn't call it shame, but real disappointment and worry that my children will look back and see me as somebody who was disengaged some of the time. And that feels terrible because in general, I have a lot of energy and enjoy being productive and engaged with them, with my life, with my career, with my friends. But tamoxifen makes me feel like I can be awake for a few hours a day and then need to lay down. And no amount of laying down actually makes me feel renewed. And so that is also problematic. I'm guessing you can relate to that. It's like even rest does not bring you back to your sort of normal, poised self.
I was first diagnosed 5 years ago and I had a recurrence. So I've been cancer free for 2.5 years. Every 6 months, I'm like, okay, I'm back to my normal self. And then I'll have some like real waves of fatigue that hit me. And I'm like, no, I'm still not back. And it's been 2.5 years. There are days that I just can't manage to do things. And now I'll just resign myself to it and be like, okay, this is a day that I'm going to have to rest and I can't show up for, whatever it is that I've committed to. And I find that to be really hard because when I say I'm going to do something, it's really important to me. I hate letting people down, but we have to prioritize ourselves now and there's no other option.
I know, but it is really difficult and it makes me feel like you're saying, like, should I push through? Like, is there even a world in which I could? And it then becomes easy to compare ourselves to other people's, to other mothers. How are they doing so much? And I don't feel I can. What I try to remind myself of is, the research around quality of interaction versus quantity of time with our children. And my Mother's Day cards that my kids write and my husband write to me every year and my birthday cards, it's like there's always this sort of reiteration of me being a real anchor in their lives, me being a true compass for them. And so I, on a daily basis, probably remind myself of that, like that I am here for them in the most important ways. And even if I can't show up to this or that, they know that I am 100% committed to them as people, that I am here to grow them up. And, when I was first diagnosed, I just didn't know if I would be. So I really try to lean into that.
Yes, it's that sense of connection that you have with your kids and that you can grow that and develop that. It doesn't have to be showing up for everything and doing everything. It's the little moments, reading with them, being there to open the door for them when they come in and asking them how their day is and just really listening where they feel like you're their person and you're connected. And that can be something I think that's simple. And that gives me a lot of hope always when I feel like, I can't be the chaperone for your camping trip with the Girl Scouts.
Absolutely not.
That one's a no.
I'm never going to try to say that is something I can do. Oh no, my husband does that.
I teamed up with Stacey Eagle and Elise Ryan to create Sea Waves of Support, healing selenite bracelet sets. You keep one and gift the other to someone facing cancer or life's challenges, a powerful reminder they're not alone. Learn more at seawavesofsupport.com. And I want to read a quote of yours, and it was pertaining to something else, but I felt like it was really apropos in being able to give ourselves permission to kind of sit in what we're in and not rushing to get over it, because I think that it makes it even harder to feel that fatigue and all of that. You said that the whiplash of life going one way and then suddenly another isn't something you recover from overnight.
It's interesting that I wrote that we don't recover from that overnight, because I don't even know if we recover from that over years. I think it really just depends on, who we are coming into this. Like I'm a pretty sensitive soul. So medications affect me in bigger ways than they might somebody else. And so that's something I've really learned. Like the whiplash of this reverberates. And it isn't something that, a week later I get to spring up and just kind of, find my footing. the way that I would think I would. And again, it's just like another learning that I've taken from this, that I have to sort of embrace who I am and how I'm affected by things.
I really want to talk about my own experience with antidepressants and anxiety medicine as it relates to cancer. And the reason I want to talk about this is that people always ask me about how I got through this experience and what wellness modalities supported me. And I talk about meditation and acupuncture, and I talk about exercise and a lot of other things that I do. And I've never spoken about medication. And honestly, I had to put that in a box in my head and locked it up. And the other day I was looking through my supplement drawer and like organizing it, and I found a bottle of lorazepam. And I was like, oh my God, I'm going back to this place where I was so depressed and I like couldn't get through the day. And I feel like I want to be honest about this because I had a woman who was a cancer mentor to me. Her name was Andrea. Most amazing woman. She had cystic fibrosis and she'd had a double lung transplant. And then the medication she was taking causes cancer. So she had developed thyroid cancer. And a dear friend had connected us when I was first diagnosed. And she was amazing. She was just like so full of life and spark. And she had a career and 2 little kids. And I was asking her, I was like, how do you seem so upbeat? How are you doing this? And she's like, I'm going to be really honest with you. You know, you'll be given the option to talk to a therapist and a psychologist, and they'll recommend that you, if you need it, to take medication. And I would recommend to you that it sounds like you're in a really difficult place, that you do that. And I don't think that I would have gotten through the experience of being in the middle of COVID lockdown and being diagnosed with cancer without it. And so I just wanted to talk about that because I think that it's not just always yoga and exercise,
definitely
and
not.
meditation and all of that. Like,
yes,
you need support in whatever way you need to find it to be able to get through.
Yeah. So tell me about that. Like, what did you decide to take, and were you feeling depressed and anxious, and did the medication make a huge difference in your life?
It made a huge difference in my life. I had a lot of anxiety because I was also running my company, Mama. I was having problems with my co-founder. I had really bad brain fog, was like one of my biggest symptoms, and how my cancer was found finally, because I would be on a Zoom call and I would just hang up and I would go and lay down. And 3 hours later, I would wake up and be like, wait, what happened? What am I doing? And I was just really disoriented as well. And so that was causing like really severe anxiety. So then once I finally got the cancer diagnosis, and I just couldn't function. Like, I couldn't sort through things. The level of anxiety, the fear of death, the fear of all of these things was just crushing for me. So I had a prescription for lorazepam, and then I took mirtazapine, which is a low-dose antidepressant.
This is yet another thing that I took on in my book, Normalize It, that creates shame for people. And I just think it's time that, for once and for all, we feel entitled to the things that we need at any given time. And so it really sounds like you figured out what was going to support you through the darkest season of your life. I mean, we can believe in all the things that we believe in and think that we know what we would never do. But then we are diagnosed and we have to rethink it all. So maybe you thought you would never take medication for mental health, and yet it sounds like it made a profound and incredibly important difference in your daily functioning. And I think the more we talk about these things, the less stigmatized, the less silence, the less shame, and the more we can just embrace our humanity and try to kind of find our way during experiences that we just never thought would apply to us. I myself, I mean, I would have loved to have started an antidepressant or an anti-anxiety medication while in the depths of all of this. Unfortunately, while taking tamoxifen, there are actually very few medications that don't counteract the effectiveness of tamoxifen. And I have been too afraid to try the things that are available and that are okay to take with tamoxifen because of the side effects. Because I just feel like I'm already struggling through so many side effects. Am I really going to dive into additional side effects? And then how will I know what's what? And it's interesting because that in itself is a symptom of anxiety, the what ifs and the guessing and the anticipating. But yes, I too would have definitely embraced getting help in that way.
And I wanted to talk about, you touched on this a little bit earlier and we were chatting about it. And I'm relating it back to the medication because I had several people that said, oh my gosh, you went through cancer with such grace. And I just don't think that it's possible to go through cancer with grace. I think that, especially we talked about I wanted to be a sturdy parent for my kids and I wanted to show up for my partner and as a whole person, but I was not concerned with showing up with grace or showing up in any way for anyone besides the people in my family and myself, or showing up on social media. I think that may have been the case because I simply was not there on social media because I had no energy for anything like that. And I did seem like I was, if I did seem like I was perky when I was showing up at the school activities, it was only because of the medication that was lifting me up. And it's that comparison pressure, which
Yes.
it blows your mind to think about it, that cancer patients or people with illness would compare themselves to other people. But it does happen, because I would look at, again, social media and see, okay, she's showing up with such energy and she's doing this to make an impact.
I know it can be so dangerous, this comparing and contrasting that we do. And it's kind of a knee-jerk reaction to being human. So I get it. But I think that while people are navigating the depths of despair and fear, it is probably best to sort of opt out of, looking at all of these perfectly curated pictures on Instagram, for example, unless somebody is finding a world of support there, which can also happen. The pressure to show up with grace is absolutely untenable. I think that we instead should be encouraged to show up with all of our vulnerability and truth, because that will model for other people that they can do it too. And that complexity is okay. And that feeling like shit one day and feeling great the next is part of the process, if we ever feel great the next day. But you know what I mean? It's like, we just don't know how we're going to feel. And so I think the pressure for perfection, outside of a cancer is enduring. And then to apply it to women who are going through something so arduous is almost cruel, right? I mean, and so we almost have to find for ourselves the space, this liminal space, like the space between living and dying, or the space between being grateful and grieving. It's like we have to learn how to hold both. We have to somehow give ourselves this kind of, not the ability to, but just like the sense that it's okay that we don't know and that we can't be fully present all the time. But I do think that other people's perspectives on this, I get it. I get people wanting to lean into silver linings, or people focusing on platitudes, or focusing on, oh, you're so strong, you'll get through this. I believe that that's really a projection of their own fear, and it is a sort of cultural construct, or lack thereof, of being able to, there's no structure, there's no sort of apparatus in place for us to talk about grief in a real way. People want to rush us through it. People want us just to, quote unquote, get better. But as we've said, even when we are technically cancer-free, if oncologists believe in that terminology, it doesn't mean that we feel fully ourselves again. And so rushing us only makes us feel like we can't be honest. And to feel like we have to show up, as you said, with grace, with ease. Oh, I have such a, positive outlook, and that's somehow, this toxic positivity pressure, like that's going to get me through. No. I think that the sooner we are honest with ourselves and other people about how truly difficult this is, the sooner we can hopefully shore up the support that we need and change this narrative so that people can just be real about where they are.
And I just heard you say a word that just like clicked something inside of me. You referred to grief. And I do think that there is this experience of grief going through cancer, because so much of what you consider to be your normal and who you are shifts throughout this whole process, whether it be the scars that we have on the outside and the trauma. I feel like I had to go back and deal with so many other things in my life that I hadn't dealt with. And just the experience of evolving. I don't want to say losing yourself, but there is you're losing who you were before cancer.
Definitely.
We become someone else.
Yes.
And it follows along the process of grieving. We're going through, as we're healing through our physical bodies and everything else that we've gone through, we're also grieving for the loss of the person that we were before.
Definitely.
And we're evolving. And for me, I discovered self-compassion, something that I was not friends with before cancer. Also compassion for everyone else too. For me, almost there were words that were triggering, but anyone that reached out to me or wanted to support in any way felt like it was something that, even if it wasn't, they didn't say the right thing, I felt compassion and gratitude for them for reaching out to me. But just so much self-compassion for myself when I was in circumstances where I couldn't do something, or I just felt like too exhausted, or my brain just couldn't handle processing it. And I was like, you know what? I have to have compassion for myself in this moment. I have to understand that if I even open up my phone right now, my head is going to explode, because just being connected to the digital was so draining for me.
Yes.
And something that there were so many things that I had to put aside. And finally being able to have self-compassion for myself at 50 years old, finally, I was like, wow, this is a completely new concept for me.
Yes.
And able to have compassion for other people, but allowing that space for myself to need to heal, to be exhausted, to just need to rest, and needing time to be able to process and to deal with all of those things was hard for me.
Of course.
It was hard for me to give myself that space.
100%, because we're so used to the go, 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 right? And until we need self-compassion to survive in a way, we don't embrace it usually, because it's not served up to us as girls and women typically. And I get it. I mean, I just think that if we don't have that self-compassion, who will? How will we get through this? And I feel like it's something that I'm proud to model for my children at this point. And so again, even though I don't show up to everything in the same way that I did before, I think they see, though, that that is their mom taking care of herself in order to refuel, to hopefully be able to be engaged later on that same day.
And it's such a healthy thing to hopefully teach our kids, that they have self-compassion now. They don't have to go through a traumatic health experience to be able to have self-compassion. Like,
That's
I
right.
would want to give that gift to them because it was a hard-fought gift for me to have.
Yes, precisely.
One last question.
Sure.
If you could leave women listening with one permission slip when it comes to facing loss, illness, or trauma, what would it say?
Wow, that's a tough one. The permission slip would say, you deserve to feel everything that you're feeling. Like, there is no use in shoving feelings down, trying to sidestep them, trying to show up in a certain way, try to sort of embody a cultural pressure. And I also want to say you're not alone. And even though that sounds trite, it's true. We know the statistics around all the types of cancers, and yet we can feel so isolated in the throes of it. And it's wonderful that the zeitgeist is sort of including these messages of you're not alone. And, mental health is being talked about so much more. But I think there's a real difference between knowing you're not alone and feeling like you're not alone. And so I think I would also really encourage people to reach out. And as my book, talks so much about, it's sharing our important stories is what connects us with community that is vital. It also allows us to shed feelings of shame if we have them and sort of work against the societal stigma that should just no longer exist. And so it doesn't have to mean that you take to social media or get on a TED Talk stage or get on, a rooftop to share your story. It can be subtle. It can be simple. It can be tender. Sharing with your neighbor, sharing with a friend, turning to a therapist, writing in a journal, just so that we continue to move our feelings and our truths through us.
Thank you. That was beautiful.
Thank you so much for having me. And, this isn't something I talk about very much, and I feel really honored that you are creating a space for women to delve into the complexity and the deep grief that cancer brings.
Thank you. I do feel like there's so many different layers to healing, and sometimes listening to other people, hearing their stories is the first step into joining community, finding a buddy, talking to your neighbor, sharing with other people, and then being able to give back yourself, whether it's being a part of a walkathon or talking to someone who's just been diagnosed. That really helps us to heal too. All of those things together. It's a long process.
It sure is.
Thanks so much for joining me on this episode of The Space Between. If this show brought you comfort or a sense of community, I'd love for you to subscribe and share it with anyone who might need it too. You can join the conversation on Instagram at thespacebetween_cancer.family and head to amoryKibler.com for more resources designed to support parents navigating cancer. Just remember, you're never alone. This podcast is here as a companion on your journey towards healing, growth, and connection.